I do think there's been also a kind of weird, and I don't think accurate defense of Tucker and what he did and the broader conversation, which is like, stop trying to cancel Tucker. And mainly it's directed at people who are just saying, I don't like the way he conducted that interview, right? So, and then it comes to this thing about, oh, you know, these people are trying to split the right or whatever. And what we need to do is just let everybody, you know, come together and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But like, you're a libertarian. I imagine that if someone came to the Libertarian Party or the libertarian movement and was like, hey guys, I think the best libertarianism is big government, you'd be like, well, you're entitled to that opinion, but you're not in this movement here, right?
Yeah,
like,
if you love socialism and gun control, you probably can't be in the libertarian movement.
Just like if you love Stalin and Hitler, maybe you are not part of the right-wing conservative movement.
Well,
is that so when people say
that's what the we don't really get to decide.
That's what the debate is about, right? Now, there are some people who say, well, if you try to have that debate, you're trying to cancel people and you're trying to split the movement. I'm not on the right, nor am I, you know, in any of these conversations, but I look at it from an outside perspective and I go, isn't that a movement trying to work out whether it believes in, as a libertarian movement, in big government? Are these ideas that Nick is talking about, do they belong in this family of views, or do they stay outside of it because they don't belong? In the same way that I don't think Tucker Carlson would have Dylan Mulvaney on, the trans influencer, and be like, tell me your views about how to chop your dick off. And then every conservative would be like, oh yeah, Tucker's entitled to have, well, he is entitled to have whatever he wants, but that doesn't fit within the conversation of the broader political wing of America. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, look, I mean, like I said before, I think there should be more debates and more conversations and all of this stuff. So I agree with you. And I also think the whole argument, which has been made on both sides, of like, you're splitting the MAGA coalition. It's like, yeah, but so are you. I mean, we're all split. Like, yeah, that's the whole problem. I'm with you on that. Like, we're figuring out which ideas belong and which don't. Right. But what's kind of interesting, right, like about just, again, not to hard, and I think you're also right that there certainly have been people, probably yourself included, who have been like, hey, I want to debate Nick Fuentes, or I think Tucker should have been, you know, more aggressive in debating him. And then they go, you're engaging in cancel culture, and that's silly. But also at the same time, Mark Levin is up there. But the thing that was interesting about Mark Levin's call for cancel culture, like I was saying before, is that he's calling for Tucker, Candace, and Nick Fuentes to be canceled, which, like, at this point are probably the three biggest right-wing political commentators in the country. And so, yes, it is certainly true that this MAGA coalition is going to have to figure out what their identity is going to be going forward after Donald Trump. And I think that's what a lot of this fight is over right now. But I think what's like, there's, again, like I said before, because there's so many different aspects to this, but there's the stuff we said before about how the left-wing racialism was always destined to trigger a reactionary racialism on the right wing. Then there's the fact that so many of these young people grew up without fathers and on drugs. And
I did a whole video about it.
You know, I mean, it's just like there's a lot of these factors. And then, of course, there's the factors that we all know, which is like the war on terrorism and what a disaster this has been for the entire country. And of course, Donald Trump, even in 2016, was really a rejection of the Bush neoconservatism. He said it right to his brother's face, that your brother lied us into a war, about the most aggressive thing you could say to somebody else, you know? And I think what's happening right now is that there's been, like, the non-interventionist, the anti-war right wing, and that ranges from non-interventionists like myself who believe in liberty and are not identitarian, all the way over to like very identitarian non-interventionists, are getting a bigger and bigger portion of the right wing in this country. And there's a new power imbalance here where, like, a lot of the old guard neocon types, interestingly, who were the never Trumpers themselves. I think it was Dinesh, when he was on your show, was bringing that up. I believe, was it?
It might have been. Yeah. Which point specifically?
What was that? Well, I think what he said, you know, I watched the interview with Dinesh on this show, and then I watched the interview with him on, like, it was like the Jewish Network channel, and I might be mixing up which happened in yours and which happened in that one, but at one point...
That's quite anti-Semitic, man.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. There you go.
I can tell you this is not the Jewish channel.
It was all a bunch of Indians talking to Jews, as far as I'm concerned. Same thing, right? But he was saying at one point that he was mentioning this is where the neoconservatives lost all their influence, is because they jumped on the never Trump.
No.
In the Reagan era, in conservatism, there was a certain, I would call it the intellectual guardians of the tribe. People like William F. Buckley, Reagan to a certain degree, but there were others, Irving Kristol. And the idea here was that if you came in with like the poison of anti-Semitism, blatant racism, criticism of affirmative action, yes. Calling blacks monkeys, no. So if you did that, you were basically asked to leave the room. And you were abolished from you wouldn't be invited to conservative conferences. You certainly wouldn't be a speaker. It would basically be the end of you as a public figure. So that's gone. And it's gone, why? Partly because we don't have a conservative intellectual class that performs that task. And why don't we have that? Well, partly because the mainstream of that class went never Trump. And so when I look around for, like, if I were to make a list of, let's say, 30 of my colleagues from the Reagan days, I would say that probably about 25 of them went anti-Trump. And they went to anti-Trump in different places. John Bolton is a little different place than, say, Bill Kristol. But nevertheless, they're by and large excluded from MAGA. And what happened is, partly as a result of a cultural shift, MAGA produces a new type of pundit.
He did kind of yada, yada, yada over the war on terrorism, as if that didn't also have a huge thing to do with how they lost their influence. Like, it was also the swimming pool of blood of innocent babies that you're standing in. But there's something very interesting to me and I've noticed this dynamic a lot, right? So this was, Ben Shapiro did several segments on me over the years, but he never said my name. It became kind of a running joke amongst my audience that he would bring. But it wasn't even like he'd play clips of when I was on Rogan. Like, he'd play a clip on my podcast and still go, some comedian who blah, blah, blah. And you're like, dude, you clearly saw it, and it's the easiest name to remember. But so the first time he ever said my name was when I came out against Donald Trump over the 12-day war. And I called for him to be impeached over it and all this stuff. I was pretty dramatic about it. So then he called me out by name, and then, I've had, Josh Hammer, this is what he tried to debate me on at that event with Charlie, where it was like, oh, look what this guy's saying about Donald Trump. And then Steven Crowder just recently, it was like, look what you said about Donald Trump and all. But it's like, guys, we all remember that you were the never Trumpers. Like, we all remember, the National Review piece.
Well, was Ben a never Trumper?
Never Trumper. Said under no circumstances would he ever vote for Donald Trump. Same with Steven Crowder. Same with Mark Levin. Mark Levin urged his whole audience to know that you will never get me to support Donald Trump.
I mean, J.D. Vance was a never Trumper.
No, but I'm just saying, but for anyone who was a never Trumper to start using that against you just seems like a very weird thing. But so there were obviously there's the war hawks who were totally against Donald Trump. They then all became Trumpers or became Democrats. Some of them just went and built Kristol and them. And now there is just this big fight about what's next.
Well, I think the fight is good.
I agree. I think I think it's necessary.
I just don't like this idea that if you say, I think these ideas, like the example I gave you of big government and the libertarian movement, these ideas should be outside of the tent. A lot of people go, that's engaging. That's not cancel culture.
No.
That's people arguing about what it means to be a conservative or right winger.
Sure, 100%. And I'll say this, as I've been saying pretty consistently, is that I just oppose all of this racialism. I mean, on all sides. I mean, it's just again, I'm not saying identity doesn't matter or there aren't any differences between groups. I'm not an egalitarian. I thought Charles Murray's book was totally reasonable. I'm not you can't mention that there are differences between median IQs or something like that. There's obviously differences between racial groups and cultures and all of these things. But the only way, just like we were saying before about the only way to go forward is for us to have a conversation and be reasonable, because otherwise we just got to always fight. The only way to go forward in a multiracial, multicultural society is to have a strong level of individualism and I will say that I think, Josh Hammer had multiple tweets. He didn't say it once, multiple posts where he said that Jew hatred is in the DNA of Europeans. And like, I think that's also like
that's a dumb statement.
All the anti-white racialism.
It's unhelpful.
Yeah. So all the anti-white racialism
terrible.
of the woke that we were all against.
But this is something I'm a sort of slowly becoming Christian, I think. But and I was raised as a Christian. But I have one of my grandparents. My grandfather was an atheist Jew. So I maybe I'm allowed to say this. Progressive Jews are the worst people in the fucking world.
I mean, I'd go for paedophiles, but
In the political realm.
Well, there's some overlap.
Right.
Yeah.
But and this is kind of the problem, I think, for Jews in general, is because Jews are disproportionately successful. You know, we can get into reasons for why that is.
Sure.
And I don't think, I think it's, anyway, let's not get into that longer conversation. They are overrepresented in everything. And so if you are on the far right and you want to prove that Jews are responsible for all the left-wing craziness, there they are. There's a bunch of progressive Jews who did all the retarded shit that got us to where we are now, right? With the woke left stuff. If you're on the left and you a left-wing anti-Semite and you want to prove that Jews are the reason for ICE raids, there's Stephen Miller right there in the White House doing all this. And so
the war on terrorism, communism. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things you could look
because
through.
Jews are overrepresented, in, particularly in intellectual endeavors.
Well, it's in my field of
Media.
view of libertarianism. I mean, it's totally like Murray Rothbard and Ludwig von Mises and just Jews all around.
So, and the same with other groups is if you really racialize a nation and you get everyone to think about their identity, I just don't think that ends well for anybody.
No. Well, it also, I agree with you. It doesn't end well for anybody. It's also, it's corrosive to your own soul and your own mind. Like, I've just seen it in people. I've seen people who get like, and both like on like all different types of racialism. Like I've seen it on woke leftists where like they just got, and somehow racialism, it's like catnip for the plebs. People love it. They get so into
tribal.
it. It's so, it like really does play on that tribal thing, and it leads to sloppy thinking. Like, I've just seen this all over the place where you're like, no, dude, like you're starting with your conclusion here and not thinking clearly. And this is one of the problems of collectivism in general, is that like, it's not actually accurate.
Did you have this?
Because we're individuals.
This is not a gotcha in any way. I'm just curious because I didn't watch all your interview with Nick. Did you have this debate with him about identitarianism?
Yeah, we got into, we got into just like the idea of collectivism versus individualism and the idea of like, like harboring resentment toward anybody because of their race. And then we kind of had the argument of like, is your beef with the Israel lobby and the government of Israel, or is your beef with the Jews? And I made the point to him that, which I think is a really sound point, is that like, there's really no question that like the Israel lobby was pushing for the war in Iraq. Whether it's the neoconservatives, AIPAC, the UAE, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, like all these groups were openly for the war in Iraq. But American Jews were the strongest in opposition to the war in Iraq. Now, part of that is because they're liberal, but whatever, still on that issue, they were good on that issue. And so I was just making the argument that like, well, no, actually, I'm much more accurate when I'm saying the Israel lobby rather than saying the Jews. And then I think at one point I was like Barry, the dentist down the street, has nothing to do with what's happening in Gaza. And he seemed to kind of agree with that. But, the thing is, I thought we might argue a little bit more on the show, but every time I kind of brought up a topic that was like the thing I thought we were going to argue about, she didn't really disagree with what I was saying. And maybe I should have been tougher. But again, also it's like, none of these things are ever a perfect interview. And I wouldn't be opposed. I said this on a show the other day, but I wouldn't be opposed to doing like a more like structured debate with Nick Fuentes about these issues. I did a debate with him once a few years ago. But look, I mean, I just think that there's going to have to be a thing. I also think part of this, which is like a kind of a broader question, is like, so I was born in 1983, all right? The Civil Rights Act in the United States was in 1964. Now, as a kid, you feel like that's ancient history, but like as you get older, you're like, oh, I was born 19 years after the Civil Rights Act. And now we're 60 plus years after the Civil Rights Act. And I think perhaps that it's kind of appropriate, and I'm not even talking about law, I'm just talking about like culture, but I think it's kind of appropriate to have a different dynamic 60 years after something versus 19 years after something. And I think that the fact that essentially the rules of polite society have been for quite a while that everyone's allowed to be collectivist. Everyone's allowed to have their own racial identity, except for straight white men. And that is just, we've got to find a way to go like, no, it can't be that. It's not going to work going forward.
But that's why we've been against woke
No, I know.
this
Well,
entire
listen,
time.
well, look, the first thing I ever saw you on, as I'm sure most people, or not most people, but a lot of people found you on that Oxford speech that went super viral. And I thought it was brilliant, man. Like, you were totally breaking it down. First of all, we're so many years removed from this that it's just unreasonable to say that, like, these people are the victimized class. Also, with the mass immigration, like, half the people who are on the lower rungs of society weren't here to be oppressed by any of this stuff. They just got welcomed into a very nice society that's been built for them. So they really don't have like a grievance with or they might think they do, but they don't. And so I do just think there's something, there's a signal of Nick Fuentes being so big that all of us should really think about, you know,
100%.
like really grapple with this. It's like there are young, straight, white men, and that's not exclusively his audience, but I think it is majority, who are not playing this game anymore. And I understand it. You know, I understand. I saw one clip again the other day. It was someone, I think it was someone at the Mamdani victory party. I don't know if you saw this, but at his victory, where they were like, white people don't have culture. You know, that whole woke thing that they go off on.
In those circles, everybody needs some spice and some color in their lives. Life's a lot better. That's the coolest thing about America. Americans have no culture except for multiculturalism.
Well said.
And we need to teach people how to embrace that. These crusty white people need to learn how to embrace it. Because they do when they pick their entertainment.
Yes.
And they need to when they start picking representatives.
It's funny you said
And there's like a certain point where you just hear that and you're like, white people don't have culture? Are you out of your mind? Like, and we've just got to find a way to like move forward where it's like, we're not doing that anymore on all sides.
Right.
Yeah.